Welcome to Back on the Stack, a cEDH channel. The group got together online again to record some spicy cEDH action. We hope you enjoyed watching it as much as we enjoyed playing it. Please leave a comment letting us know what you thought about the gameplay. We are always taking advice to tune our games into the best production that we can. If you do enjoy the video, please like, subscribe, and share with friends. Now, let's get right into it and see what decks are being piloted tonight. Tonight, I'm excited to showcase my pet deck. This is my personal version of Blue Farm, which has done very well for me in competitive play, though it is pretty far off of the database list. It does all the typical Tymna Kraum shenanigans and looks to win through Authorical or Underworld Breach. With a Mold of 6, this was a no-brainer to keep, with extra mana, a tutor, and counter magic.
Howdy, my name is Levi, and today I'm playing the partner pair of Bruse and Thrasios. This deck wants to make infinite mana and pump it into Thrasios. This opening hand I kept a Dockside, and that's really it. It probably should have been a Mold of 4, but I was a coward.
Hey everybody, it's Eli, and tonight I'm piloting Kenrith the Return King. This deck seeks to create infinite mana as quick as possible and sink it into Kenrith to win the game. The reason I kept this hand was on a Mold of 5. It was Mana Vault for some quick mana. If I draw a turn 2 land, I can get Kenrith out. I also have Phyrexia Metamorph and 2 tutors as well. Hopefully get a game plan together and see what we can do with that.
FreedomWaffle here on Dargo Thrasios. This is a combo mid-range list which uses layered combos to either present win early or pivot into a Thrasios grind plan with Seedborn Muse. This hand is fantastic. I have a turn 1 Remora, and I have a backup plan of Imperial Recruiter for Dockside into a Life's Legacy to draw 7. Bottoming the Tidespout is totally free because you want that in your deck to pod into with Dargo anyways. But yeah, turn 1 Fish. Fantastic.
With introductions out of the way, J-Rock will kick us off. He draws and plays Arid Mesa for turn. He casts Mana Crypt. He pays a life, sacks his Arid Mesa, and fetches up Tundra to the battlefield. He casts Savine's Reclamation, targeting the Arid Mesa in his graveyard. He pays a life and sacks the Arid Mesa a second time, fetching up a Badlands to the battlefield. He passes the turn. Levi draws and shocks in Steam Vents. He passes. Eli draws and plays Exotic Orchard. He casts Mana Vault. He passes. Waffle draws and plays Tropical Island for turn. He casts Mystic Remora. He passes the turn. In his upkeep, J-Rock wins his Crypt roll. He draws and plays Command Tower for turn. He casts his commander, Tymna the Weaver. He casts Drannith Magistrate. He passes the turn. Levi draws and plays Misty Rainforest for turn. He pays a life, sacks it, and fetches up Savannah to the battlefield. He casts Talisman of Curiosity. Fish triggers and Waffle draws. Levi passes the turn. Eli draws and plays Verdict Catacombs for turn. He pays 2 life to help cast Phyrexian Metamorph. It ETBs and he has it become a copy of Drannith Magistrate. He pays a life, sacks his Verdict Catacombs, and fetches up Underground Seed to the battlefield. He casts Demonic Tutor. Fish triggers and Waffle draws. Eli tutors a card to hand and then passes. In his upkeep, Waffle pays for Fish. He draws and plays Flooded Strand for turn. He pays a life, sacks it, and fetches up Volcanic Island to the battlefield. He casts Kraum Mox. It ETBs and he imprints Life's Legacy. He casts Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy. Waffle passes the turn. In his upkeep, J-Rock loses his Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays Polluted Delta for turn. He casts Vampiric Tutor. Fish triggers and Waffle draws. He searches his library for a card, puts it on top of his library, and loses 2 life. He moves to combat and swings Tymna at Levi. He takes the damage, and in his second main phase, J-Rock loses 1 and draws 1 through Tymna. He casts Rhystic Study. Fish triggers and Waffle draws. J-Rock passes the turn. Levi draws and plays Bloodstained Mire for turn. He pays a life, sacks it, and fetches up Plateau to the battlefield. He passes the turn. Eli draws and simply passes. In his upkeep, Waffle pays for Fish. He draws and plays Windswept Heath for turn. He passes. In his upkeep, J-Rock loses his Crypt roll and loses 3 life. He draws and moves directly into combat. He swings Tymna at Levi. He takes the damage, and in his second main phase, J-Rock loses 1 and draws 1 through Tymna. He casts Gamble. Fish triggers, and he pays. He tutors up a card into his hand and then randomly discards Otawara Soaring City. J-Rock passes the turn. Levi draws and casts Arcane Signet. Rhystic and Fish both trigger, and in response, Waffle loses 1 life, sacks his Windswept Heath, and fetches up Taiga to the battlefield. Then both J-Rock and Waffle draw. Levi attempts to pass, but in response, Eli casts Worldly Tutor. Rhystic and Fish both trigger, Eli pays for Rhystic, for Waffle draws from Fish. It resolves in Eli Tutor's phantasmal image to the top of his library. The turn moves to Eli. Eli draws and casts Phantasmal Image. Rhystic triggers and J-Rock draws. It ETBs and he has it enter as a copy of Tymna. The table jokes that Eli secretly just wants to pilot Blue Farm instead of Kenrith. He moves to combat and swings his Drannith copy at Levi. He takes the damage, and in his second main phase, Eli loses one and draws one through Tymna. He passes the turn. In his upkeep, Waffle pays for Fish. He draws and casts Mana Crypt. Rhystic triggers and J-Rock draws. Waffle moves to his end step, and in response, J-Rock pays 1 life, sacks his Underground Sea, and fetches Volcanic Island to the battlefield. Waffle then discards a hand size, and the turn moves to J-Rock. In his upkeep, J-Rock wins his Crypt roll. He draws and moves directly into combat. He swings Tymna at Levi. He takes the damage, and in his second main phase, J-Rock loses one and draws one through Tymna. He casts Esper Sentinel. He plays Bloodstained Mire for turn. He pays a life, sacks it, and fetches Underground Sea to the battlefield. He casts Diabolic Intent, sacrificing Esper as an additional cost. Fish triggers and Waffle draws. J-Rock tutors a card into hand and then casts Thassa's Oracle. With the ETB on the stack, he casts Demonic Consultation, choosing Hungry Heifer. In response, Levi casts Force of Negation. Fish and Rhystic both trigger, and J-Rock and Waffle both draw. In response, J-Rock casts Force of Will for its alternate casting cost, losing a life and exiling Brain Freeze. Fish triggers and Waffle draws. Decon resolves and J-Rock exiles his entire library. Thassa's trigger goes back on the stack, and in response, Waffle casts Born Upon the Wind. Rhystic triggers and J-Rock states he will decline to draw from any Rhystic triggers. Born resolves and Waffle draws a card. He casts Basalt Monolith. Waffle demonstrates a loop of creating infinite colorless mana through Basalt and Kinnan. He casts Mox Diamond. It ETBs and he discards Gemstone Caverns. He casts Talisman of Curiosity. He taps the Mox Diamond for double red through Kinnan and casts Imperial Recruiter. It ETBs and he tutors Dockside Extortionist to hand. He casts Dockside. It ETBs and he creates 6 treasure tokens. He casts Finale of Devastation, where X equals like 1 billion. He tutors Spellseeker to the battlefield. It ETBs and he tutors Cyclonic Rift to hand. He casts an overloaded Cyclonic Rift. He casts his commander, Thrasios. With the table out of answers, he explains that he will now draw through his deck, putting lands into play until he has Gaia's Cradle into play. He casts Underworld Breach just to return Eternal Witness to the battlefield. He casts Snap, targeting Eternal Witness and untapping Gaia's Cradle and any blue-producing land. He recasts Eternal Witness, returning Snap to hand. He presents a loop of doing this to create infinite green mana through Gaia's Cradle. He then continues the loop but switches from Gaia's Cradle to another mana-producing land, creating infinite colored mana. He casts Displacer Kit. He casts Lotus Petal. He cracks it for double red and casts Lightning Bolt, targeting an opponent's face. Kitten triggers and he flickers Ewit, returning Lotus Petal to hand. He recasts Petal, flickering Ewit to return Lightning Bolt to hand. He demonstrates a loop of cracking the Lotus Petal, recasting the Lightning Bolt, flickering Ewit to return the petal to hand, to then recast it and return Lightning Bolt to hand. He does this until all of his opponents are dead, and Waffle wins the game. Well, after the group thanked FreedomWaffle for giving us a free coaching session on how to win games with Flair, we decided to extort him for more. So we shuffled up, re-randomized seed order, and tried again.
The reason I kept this hand is a turn 1 draw engine with Esper Sentinel, as well as Soul Ring and Consecrated Sphinx as a backup game plan if things get tricky and I can draw some extra cards off of that.
This game, I had no good hands until I went all the way down to 1, and I decided to keep an Elvish Mystic over a land in hopes that I would draw land turn 1 and be able to start ramping into an actual Thrasios game plan, and yeah, tough mulligans.
Howdy, Levi again, and this time around I decided to keep a hand with a little bit more of a game plan. I got a Devoted Druid to kind of bait out interaction, when my real win con is going to be a Kinnan Basalt line with this Eladamri's Call.
Well, I thought I was going to win that last game, but Waffle shut that down real hard. I hate being in 4th seat, but at least this hand can get me a turn 1 Kraum, so I decided to keep it. Hopefully I can draw into some value pieces and start pressuring the board again. With opening hands decided, Eli will kick us off. He draws and plays Savannah for turn. He casts Esper Sentinel. He passes the turn. Waffle draws and passes. Levi draws and plays Verdict Catacombs for turn. He pays a life, sacks it, and fetches Savannah to the battlefield. He exiles Simian Spirit Guide from his hand to add 1 red to his mana pool. He casts Devoted Druid. He passes the turn. J-Rock draws and casts Jeweled Lotus. Esper triggers and Eli draws. J-Rock plays Tundra for turn. He casts Kraum Mox. It ETBs and he imprints Phantasmal Image. He casts his commander, Kraum. He moves to Krombat and swings at Levi. He declares no blocks and the turn moves to Eli. Eli draws and plays Bayou for turn. He casts Soul Ring. Eli passes the turn. Waffle draws and plays Gaia's Cradle for turn. He passes. Levi draws and plays Bloodstained Mire for turn. He pays a life, sacks it, and fetches Volcanic Island to the battlefield. He casts Lotus Petal. Esper triggers and Eli draws. Levi casts his commander, Thrasios, Triton Hero. Kraum triggers and J-Rock draws. Levi passes the turn. J-Rock draws and plays Mana Confluence for turn. He moves to combat and swings Kraum at Levi. J-Rock moves to his end step, and in response, Eli casts Enlightened Tutor. He fetches up Rhystic Study to the top of his library. The turn moves to Eli. Eli draws and plays Volcanic Island for turn. He casts Rhystic Study. He passes. Waffle draws and, missing another land drop, moves to his end step. However, in response, Levi casts Eladamri's Call. Rhystic and Esper both trigger, and Eli draws for both. In response to that, J-Rock flashes in Archivist of Ogma. Rhystic triggers and Eli draws. Then Levi tutors Kinnan Bonder Prodigy to hand. Archivist triggers, but everyone forgot until after the game. We blamed it on Waffle's dangerous board state. The turn then moved to Levi. Levi draws and casts Kinnan. Rhystic triggers and Eli draws. Levi taps Devoted Druid to now add 2 green to his pool. He adds a neg1 counter to untap it and then retap it for an additional 2 green. He casts Basalt Monolith. Rhystic, Esper, and Kraum all trigger. Eli draws twice and J-Rock draws once. In response, J-Rock casts Force of Negation for its alternative casting cost, exiling Step Through. Rhystic triggers and Eli draws. Force counters Basalt and a sad Levi passes the turn. J-Rock draws and moves directly into combat. He swings Kraum at Eli. He takes the damage and J-Rock passes the turn. Eli draws and plays Tropical Island for turn. He casts Eladamri's Call. It resolves and he tutors Delighted Halfling to hand. Archivist triggers and J-Rock gains a life and draws a card. Eli casts Delighted Halfling. Kraum triggers and J-Rock draws. Eli discards a hand size and passes the turn. Waffle draws and sadly passes the turn. Levi draws and shocks in Breeding Pool for turn. He casts Esper Sentinel. Rhystic triggers and Eli draws. Levi passes the turn. J-Rock draws and plays Otawara Soaring City for turn. He taps it to cast Mana Vault. Esper, and Rhystic all trigger. J-Rock pays for Eli's triggers, and Levi draws 1. J-Rock moves to combat and swings Kraum at Eli. He takes it, and J-Rock passes the turn. Eli draws and casts Teferi Time Raveler. Esper triggers and Eli pays. In response, Levi casts Crop Rotation, sacrificing Savannah as an additional cost. Esper and Rhystic both trigger, and Levi pays for both. Levi tutors Gaia's Cradle to the battlefield. Archivist triggers, J-Rock gains a life, and draws a card. Still in response, Levi activates Thrasios and puts Scalding Tarn onto the battlefield tapped. Still in response, J-Rock casts Tainted Pact. Esper, and Rhystic all trigger. J-Rock pays for Eli's triggers and Levi draws 1. In response, Eli casts Pact of Negation. In response to that, Levi casts his own Pact of Negation, targeting Eli's Pact. Rhystic and Kraum both trigger, Levi pays for Rhystic, and J-Rock draws from Kraum. Pact counters Pact, and the Tainted Pact resolves. J-Rock exiles cards until he hits Force of Will, but this is where he's reminded that Teferi is uncounterable since it was cast with mana from Delighted Halfling. With the table now out of answers, Teferi resolves. Eli casts Dark Ritual, adding 3 black. He casts Displacer Kit. He activates Teferi's -3 ability, returning Soul Ring to his hand and drawing a card. He casts Mox Amber. Kitten triggers and he flickers Teferi. Eli then presents a loop of casting Mox Amber to flicker Teferi, bouncing his Mox Amber and drawing a card through Teferi. He draws his entire deck. He then casts Thassa's Oracle. With his devotion to blue being greater than the number of cards in his library, Eli wins the game. A very special thank you goes to FreedomWaffle for taking time out of his schedule to play a few games with us. In Game 1, FreedomWaffle showed us an amazing instant speed win, all done while J-Rock's Thassa's Oracle ETB trigger was on the stack. In Game 2, however, he showed us that mulling to 1 is a horrible idea. Congrats to Eli on his Protected to Fairy Kitten combo for the Game 2 win. We hope you enjoyed watching the production. Feel free to check out the deck links listed below, and we will see you back on the stack.